What if the most classified secrets of the United States military were already written down 1,000 years ago? For decades, the public has been told that the UFO phenomenon began in the 1940s, a product of the Cold War and the space age. We were led to believe that Project Blue Book, the government's official investigation into these mysteries, was looking for visitors from the stars. But deep within the declassified files, a much darker and more ancient truth begins to emerge. The investigators weren't just looking at radar screens, they were looking at forbidden manuscripts. They realized that the metallic crafts defying our laws of physics were the exact same flying shields described by medieval monks, the Vimanas, found in suppressed Sanskrit records, and the chariots of fire, hidden in the pages of banned alchemical grimoires. Tonight we are stepping beyond the official lies. We are going to connect the dots between the world's most secret military project and the world's most dangerous books. We are going to prove that what the government calls unidentified aerial phenomena is actually a presence that has been documented in the shadows of our history for millennia. This isn't just a search for aliens. This is the rediscovery of a forbidden reality that has been hidden in plain sight, written in the ink of our ancestors, and kept under lock and key by the keepers of the archives. Prepare yourself. We are about to enter the vault where the modern pilot meets the ancient mystic. This is the connection between Project Blue Book and the forbidden manuscripts. Before you begin, if at any point the story resonates with you, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you. For decades, the halls of power maintained a rigid facade of denial. Within the structured confines of Project Blue Book, the mission was simple: categorize, debunk, and dismiss. But at the heart of this operation sat a man of rigorous intellect, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Initially hired as a scientific consultant to provide astronomical explanations for the inexplicable, Hynek began as the ultimate skeptic. He was the man who would tell the public they were seeing swamp gas when they were actually witnessing the impossible. However, as the thousands of files crossed his desk, a disturbing realization began to take root in his mind. The reports coming from modern pilots and radar operators were not new. They were echoes of a much older, darker knowledge found only in the manuscripts the world had been taught to forget. Hynek started to notice a bridge between the physical anomalies reported in the mid-century and the esoteric descriptions found in forbidden hermetic texts and alchemical journals. He realized that the phenomena were not merely mechanical or extraterrestrial in a simple sense, but perhaps something far more complex, something that had been interacting with humanity since the dawn of writing. The Project Blue Book files started to mirror the very things described in the forbidden books of the past. He saw that the behavior of these crafts, their ability to materialize and dematerialize, to defy gravity without visible means of propulsion, and to affect the consciousness of witnesses, was identical to the descriptions of celestial messengers and shining ones found in ancient restricted archives. This shift in his perspective was revolutionary. He moved away from the idea of nuts and bolts craft from another planet and began leaning toward an interdimensional hypothesis. This theory suggested that the entities were coming from a reality that overlapped with our own, a concept that has been the cornerstone of esoteric traditions for millennia. The forbidden manuscripts of the Rosicrucians and the hidden diaries of medieval mystics spoke of a subtle realm inhabited by intelligences that could manifest in our physical world at will. Hynek found himself looking at a top-secret military database and seeing the exact same patterns that a 15th-century occultist would have recorded in a leather-bound banned grimoire. In his private thoughts and later writings, the transition was clear. He understood that the military was trying to solve a spiritual and metaphysical puzzle using only the tools of basic physics. The paradigm shift occurred when he accepted that these sightings were not isolated modern events, but part of a continuous ancient thread. He recognized that the secret being kept by the government was the same secret protected by the keepers of forbidden libraries. We are not alone in our own space. The modern close encounter was simply a new name for a phenomenon that ancient manuscripts had documented with terrifying precision. By the time he distanced himself from the official government stance, Hynek had become a bridge between the laboratory and the secret vault, proving that the answers to the sky's greatest mysteries were likely buried in the dust of the world's most dangerous books. While the public was told that unidentified flying objects were a product of the Cold War and secret experimental aircraft, the analysts within Project Blue Book were quietly looking back thousands of years. They were drawn to the vast, complex, and often suppressed Sanskrit records of ancient India. Within these manuscripts, specifically the epics that many consider mere mythology, lies a technical vocabulary that mirrors modern aeronautics with chilling accuracy. These texts describe the Vimanas, flying machines of various shapes and sizes that traversed the skies with the speed of the wind and emitted sounds like 1,000 lions. For the military investigators of the 50s and 60s, these weren't just stories. They were potential blueprints, or at the very least, evidence of a historical presence that defied the official timeline of human progress. Deep within the Sanskrit tradition, there are accounts of crafts that could become invisible, travel between the stars, and use weapons of light that could incinerate entire cities. One specific manuscript, often discussed in whispers among those who study forbidden history, is a treatise on aeronautics that details the construction of these vessels. It describes alloys that do not rust, pilots who must wear specific suits, and power sources based on mercury and solar energy. Project Blue Book researchers found themselves comparing the maneuverability of modern sightings, the sudden right-angle turns and the instantaneous acceleration, to the flight patterns described in these ancient scrolls. The Sanskrit records suggest that the gods did not fly on wings of feathers, but in metallic chariots that operated on principles of resonance and vibration. The connection between the ancient and the modern becomes undeniable when we look at the descriptions of the propulsion systems. In the forbidden sections of these Indian epics, the Vimanas are said to be powered by the king of liquids, often interpreted as Mercury, spun at high speeds within a vortex. Interestingly, declassified documents from the era of Project Blue Book show an intense interest in mercury-based propulsion and anti-gravity experiments. It is as if the military was trying to reverse engineer a technology that had already been mastered in a forgotten epoch. These manuscripts don't just describe the crafts, they describe the atmospheric effects, the way the air glows, the way the ground trembles, and the physiological effects on those who stand too close. These are the exact same details found in the high trace cases of the Blue Book archives. Furthermore, these ancient records speak of the war in the heavens, describing battles between different factions of these flying machines. The descriptions of these encounters are not poetic abstractions. They are tactical. They speak of missiles of fire and circular reflections that could disable an enemy craft. To a Project Blue Book analyst, this sounded less like religion and more like a historical report of aerial combat. The existence of these manuscripts poses a dangerous question to the established order. If these machines were real, then what does that say about the objects in our skies today? It suggests that we are not witnessing an invasion from another galaxy, but a recurring presence that has been recorded in the most sacred and restricted texts of our ancestors. The Sanskrit records remain a thorn in the side of modern archaeology, and a goldmine for those seeking the truth behind the UFO phenomenon, proving that the secrets of the future are often written in the languages of the past. The profound visions recorded in sacred texts have long been interpreted through a theological lens, attributed to divine intervention or symbolic allegory. However, within the confidential files of Project Blue Book, there existed a fascinating and controversial line of inquiry. Investigators, faced with seemingly impossible aerial phenomena, began to revisit some of the most compelling and perplexing accounts from antiquity, particularly the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel's vivid description of a whirlwind coming out of the north and the living creatures with wheels within wheels. Far from dismissing these as mere religious fantasy, certain analysts started to perceive them as detailed eyewitness accounts of advanced aerial technology, strikingly similar to modern UFO reports. Ezekiel's recounting of 4 living creatures that went straight forward and sparkled like the color of burnished brass, alongside the descriptions of their wheels that were like the color of a beryl stone, presented a technical enigma. The precise geometry, the descriptions of movement that defied natural laws, and the emitting of bright light and fire going up and down among the living creatures resonated deeply with testimonies from jet pilots and radar operators who reported metallic objects moving with impossible agility and emitting brilliant glows. The concept of wheels within wheels perplexed biblical scholars for centuries, yet to a Blue Book investigator analyzing radar telemetry of nested spheres and complex rotational patterns, it sounded disturbingly familiar to the behavior of some observed objects. This convergence of ancient prophecy and modern observation led some within the project to explore texts that were considered even more forbidden than the official scriptures, the esoteric traditions of Merkabah mysticism. These ancient Jewish mystical traditions describe visionary ascents through celestial realms, often involving encounters with complex, luminous chariots and divine beings. While ostensibly spiritual, the technical precision in some of these Merkabah texts regarding the structure and function of these chariots offered a parallel to Ezekiel's account. These forbidden manuscripts, often suppressed due to their perceived heretical nature, depicted a cosmos not merely of angels, but of intricate mechanisms and energetic transport, resonating with a non-supernatural interpretation of propulsion and navigation. The significance for Project Blue Book was immense. If Ezekiel's vision was not a miraculous visitation, but an encounter with a physical, technological entity, then the implications for understanding modern sightings were profound. It suggested a continuity of interaction between humanity and these enigmatic aerial phenomena over thousands of years. The living creatures and their wheels were no longer just symbols of God's glory. They became potential descriptions of biological or robotic entities operating complex machinery. By cross-referencing these ancient, often restricted narratives with contemporary reports, the project inadvertently began to deconstruct the boundary between the sacred and the scientific, hinting at a truth far older and stranger than a simple alien visitation. These biblical and apocryphal accounts, once confined to theological debate, became vital pieces in the puzzle of what Hynek himself would later call an interdimensional presence, proving that the earliest records of humanity contained clues to the greatest mystery of our skies. While the public often views the Middle Ages as a time of simple superstition, the records left behind by medieval chroniclers tell a much more clinical and terrifying story. Project Blue Book investigators discovered that the European continent was a hotbed of aerial activity centuries before the invention of the airplane. In the suppressed annals of various monasteries, there are repeated references to flying shields, burning globes, and celestial armies that engaged in maneuvers that mirror modern military engagement. One of the most famous, yet often dismissed, accounts comes from the year 776, during the siege of Sigeberg Castle. Chroniclers of the time recorded the sudden appearance of two flaming red shields hovering over the church. The effect was immediate. The pagan Saxons fled in terror, believing the heavens themselves were intervening. To a modern analyst, this wasn't a miracle. It was a tactical psychological operation conducted by an unknown aerial presence. As the centuries progressed, these accounts became more detailed and more frequent. In the restricted archives of Nuremberg and Basel, researchers found woodcuts and written testimonies from the mid-1500s that describe massive celestial battles. The witnesses did not speak in the flowery language of poets. They described spheres, cylinders, and cross-shaped crafts emerging from behind the sun to engage in a violent aerial struggle. These chroniclers noted that some of these objects would crash to the earth, dissolving into smoke or leaving behind strange, brittle residues. Project Blue Book staff were particularly interested in these residues, as they matched modern reports of angel hair or metallic slag found after UFO sightings. These medieval manuscripts prove that the phenomenon has a physical, tangible component that leaves a trace in our reality. The Church, recognizing the danger these sightings pose to established dogma, often moved to classify these events as either demonic or divine, effectively locking away the truth. Any manuscript that suggested these objects were physical machines operated by non-divine beings was considered heretical and hidden in the Vatican's secret archives or lost to the fires of the Inquisition. However, the descriptions that survived are chillingly consistent. They speak of luminous beams that could paralyze men or animals and metallic birds that moved without flapping their wings. In one banned chronicle from the 12th century, an object is described as having windows through which faces could be seen, not the faces of angels, but of something other. What Project Blue Book realized by studying these medieval chroniclers was that the pattern of visitation was constant. These were not hallucinations of a primitive mind. They were the observations of people trying to describe high technology using the only vocabulary they had. A shield was a disc, a lance was a cylinder, a chariot of fire was a glowing craft. By peeling back the layers of religious interpretation, the investigators found a historical database of UFO activity that spanned over 1,000 years. These manuscripts serve as a bridge, showing that the flying saucers of the 1950s were simply the latest chapter in a saga that medieval men had been documenting in their cold stone cells for generations. The truth was never out there in the future. It was already written down in the forgotten ink of the past. By the way, if you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe. Let's continue. As Project Blue Book's investigations deepened, a small group of analysts, including J. Allen Hynek and the researcher Jacques Vallée, began to notice a startling correlation that traditional science could not explain. The physical descriptions and behaviors of modern grey aliens, small stature, large eyes, telepathic communication, and the tendency to abduct humans, were nearly identical to the descriptions of the gentry, or the hidden people, found in forbidden Celtic manuscripts and medieval folklore. These were not the whimsical fairies of modern children's stories, but the dangerous, elusive, and technologically superior beings described in the suppressed fairy faith traditions. These ancient texts, often kept in restricted library collections due to their dark and superstitious nature, depicted a race of beings that lived alongside humanity in a parallel reality, occasionally crossing over into our world through portals or mounds. The manuscripts describe these entities as having the power to manipulate time and space. A human captured by the fairies might spend what feels like a single night in their realm, only to return to our world and find that decades have passed. This time dilation is a recurring theme in modern UFO abduction cases documented in the Blue Book files. Furthermore, the ancient records speak of these beings performing strange medical examinations on humans, specifically focusing on reproductive organs, a disturbing parallel to the accounts of modern abductees. In the forbidden folklore of the British Isles and Scandinavia, these encounters were not seen as visits from another planet, but as intrusions from an otherworld that exists in the same space as our own but at a different frequency. Project Blue Book investigators began to entertain the interdimensional hypothesis, suggesting that these objects and their occupants are not traveling across vast light years of space, but are bleeding through from a coexisting dimension. The forbidden manuscripts of the past often referred to this as the subtle realm or the etheric plane. The sightings of glowing lights in the woods or ships that vanish instantly were explained in these ancient texts as the opening and closing of gateways. The magic of the ancients was, in reality, a form of physics that we are only now beginning to grasp. By comparing the top-secret military reports to these banned accounts of the fairy faith, the investigators realized that the Greys have likely been here as long as humanity itself, playing a hidden role in our development. This connection changes everything. It suggests that the secret isn't about extraterrestrial life from a distant star, but about the true nature of our reality. The forbidden manuscripts were not collections of myths, but survival guides for a world where these entities have always existed. They describe the taboos and rules for interacting with these beings, rules that modern military pilots often inadvertently break. The fairy faith manuscripts prove that the phenomenon is psychic as much as it is physical. By ignoring these ancient warnings, Project Blue Book was trying to fight a ghost with a machine gun. The records of the past show that these entities have always been the masters of deception, hiding in the shadows of our consciousness and appearing in whatever form our culture is prepared to accept, whether it be a demon in the 12th century or an alien in the 20th. One of the most guarded secrets of Project Blue Book involved the physical recovery of material from landing sites. While the official narrative claimed that UFOs left no trace, the internal files tell a story of metal slag, liquid droplets, and brittle fragments that defied conventional metallurgical analysis. When these samples were brought to the lab, researchers found isotopic ratios that do not occur naturally on Earth. Surprisingly, the only other place where such strange metallic compositions and purified elements are described is in the forbidden world of alchemy. For centuries, alchemists claimed to work with celestial lead and starborn silver, writing in cryptic manuscripts about materials that were transmuted through high-energy processes. Project Blue Book's physical evidence suggested that these ancient practitioners may have been describing the very same materials that comprise these crafts. In several declassified cases, witnesses reported seeing objects eject a molten, lead-like substance before accelerating at high speeds. When collected, this material often showed a layered structure of magnesium and bismuth, arranged in microns-thin sheets. This is not a natural alloy. It is a manufactured metamaterial designed to manipulate electromagnetic waves or gravitational fields. This specific combination, magnesium and bismuth, appears in coded form in certain restricted alchemical grimoires, where it is referred to as the double dragon or the magistery of the air. The ancients believed these metals, when processed through secret fires, could capture the breath of the stars. To the scientists of the 1950s, this was a revelation. The magic of alchemy was actually a highly advanced form of solid-state physics that the world had lost or suppressed. The manuscripts of the 17th century alchemist Irenaeus Philalethes and the hidden notes of Isaac Newton contain references to Sophic mercury and metals that possess an inner light. Project Blue Book analysts found that when certain UFO fragments were subjected to high-frequency light, they exhibited properties of superconductivity or weight loss. This mirrors the alchemical goal of volatilizing the fixed, making heavy matter light. The forbidden texts were not just about turning lead into gold. They were about the transmutation of matter through the manipulation of a universal solvent or ether. The physical evidence found at Blue Book sites proved that someone or something was utilizing this precise technology, proving that the impossible chemistry of the ancient manuscripts was based on a tangible physical reality. Furthermore, these alchemical records often warned of the biological effects of handling these star-born metals. Chroniclers wrote of wasting sickness and burns from within after contact with fallen celestial objects. This matches perfectly with the medical reports in the Blue Book archives, where witnesses suffered from radiation-like symptoms, hair loss, and cellular damage after touching the exterior of a craft. The secret being protected was that these ancient banned books contained the hazardous operating manuals for the very technology the military was desperately trying to understand. By linking the metallurgical data of the 20th century to the alchemical secrets of the 14th, the project uncovered a terrifying truth. The great work of the alchemists was not a myth, but a recorded history of man interacting with a technology that literally came from another world. Just before the last part, I pinned a question in the comments section. I invite you to share your best theories on the subject. The final investigation into Project Blue Book reveals a chilling synergy between the highest levels of government secrecy and the most restricted vaults of ancient libraries. As the project neared its official closing, it became clear that the silence maintained by the military was not merely about avoiding public panic over aliens. It was about the realization that the phenomenon is inextricably linked to the very foundations of human civilization and the forbidden knowledge that has been suppressed for millennia. The archives of the military and the secret shelves of the world's oldest institutions are protecting the same terrifying truth, that humanity is not the primary intelligence on this planet, and our history has been shaped by an external force that ancient manuscripts have documented with precise, often brutal clarity. The silence of the archives exists because both the modern investigator and the ancient priest understood that to acknowledge the reality of these crafts and their occupants is to dismantle the current human power structure. If the public were to realize that the gods of the Sanskrit records, the celestial messengers of the medieval chroniclers, and the pilots of the Blue Book files are the same entities, the narrative of human progress would collapse. We would be forced to admit that our technological advancements are often just rediscoveries of a lost, superior science already described in banned alchemical texts. The military's desire to keep the technology for national security mirrors the ancient occultists' desire to keep the great work for an initiated few. In both cases, the common man is left in the dark, fed a diet of skepticism and swamp gas explanations. This silence also protects the most unsettling aspect of the phenomenon, its deceptive and manipulative nature. The forbidden manuscripts often warn that these entities are masters of illusion, who operate behind a veil, appearing in forms that suit the current era's belief system. By keeping the records separate, treating UFOs as a modern scientific mystery and ancient manuscripts as religious mythology, the authorities ensure that no one connects the dots. If the connection were made, it would reveal that these beings have been influencing human culture, religion, and perhaps even our biology for thousands of years. The Project Blue Book files and the Forbidden Books are two halves of the same map, and when placed together, they show a world where humanity is a secondary species, living in the shadow of a much older and more complex reality. In the end, the closure of Project Blue Book was not an admission that there was nothing to find, but a tactical retreat into even deeper shadows. The investigators had seen enough to know that the answers were not in the stars, but in the restricted archives of our own past. The silence remains because the truth is transformative. It suggests that our reality is far more porous and controlled than we dare to imagine. The pilots are not coming. They have never left. They are written into the ink of every banned manuscript and recorded in every declassified military encounter. The archives remain silent, because to speak the truth would be to admit that the forbidden history of our ancestors is, in fact, the most accurate record of our present and our future.